In this video, we'll be taking a look at hierarchies in Maya and how we can set a complex structure up to where we can animate something and move something and have a parent-child relationship. So basically what I'm talking about is something like this, what you see here. If I was able to select this part, everything moves here. If I select the base, the entire object moves. If I select this part here, I'm able to rotate within through here, and I can select, it basically selects all these children that are parented to this. If I move this piece, it moves in and out like this, and then this becomes a rotation point for me, and then I can open up these. These are separate models here. So you can see what happens with us parenting like this. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is ruin the hierarchy that I've built. I'm just going to select everything and just hit Shift P to unparent everything. So you can find this under Edit, and you can see Parent and Unparent. And you see the hotkeys for this. You can parent something or unparent it. So in the outliner, you can see now everything is open here. I might suggest that you make an empty group. So if you hit Control G, that'll make a group, or you can go up here to Edit and go to Group. You can see the hotkey for that. If you do that, that'll make an empty group right in the middle of the world, and we can start assigning things to that and parenting things. So there's different ways that we can parent things. We can go ahead and select this, and if we find this in the outliner, I can hold down Control and I can select this one here, and I can tap P for the parent. So that's one way that we can parent it. We can also go in the outliner, you can middle mouse drag it up into this group like this, and that will parent it as well. So if you want to do it in the outliner, those are the ways that you can do it in the outliner. If you want to do this more in a visual format, so if I select this, I can select multiple objects actually. So if I selected these two and wanted this to be the parent, I would hold down Shift and let that be the last thing I select, and then I tap P, and that'll parent all those to these objects. You can always check it by selecting what will be the parent object and then testing and seeing if it moves everything around like that. So I actually don't want this to be parented to this what I'm considering the base here. I'm going to want this to follow along with, I call this a head shape. And so if I select this and then hold down Shift, select this as the last thing, and if I parent that, this will move around with it. So I want it to look like this is being pushed up and down. So if this is the parent, I can grab that and animate that and move that around. Now you can see I've got this pivot point, and that is, I'm going to want that to move along with the head as well. So I'm going to select that, hold down Shift, select this here, and I'll just tap P for this. Something else to talk about is making sure the pivot points are exactly where I want them to be, and the pivot point on this is not where I want it to be. So let me show you what we can do for that. If you tap D, you can move in a mode where you can put the pivot point wherever you want it to be, and if you tap D again, it changes the pivot point. So you can see we could rotate about that point and move it and scale and rotate about that point, and so that this pivot point actually matters. I'm going to tap D. I want this to be right in the world. So I know this vert that I have is snapped right to the center of the world, so I can hold down V and I could snap to verts. So that's one way that I could do it. The other thing that I know I could do, if I want this to be snapped to the grid, I can hold down X, and I'm temporarily turning on grid snapping. When we held down V, we're temporarily turning on vert snapping. So I can hold down X, and I can move it here, and I can move it along this axis, and I can push it right here, and then tap D, and then now my pivot point for this is set. I would suggest this also. I've gone through and then froze transformations. So before you start parenting things, you might want to go up here and say modify freeze transformations and do the option box. And you'll probably want to freeze translation, rotation, and scale. You might not want to do rotation if you've got a very specific angle for something, and if you want to keep that angle, you could still freeze translate and scale, and that will freeze those two channels and leave rotation alone. So you can turn on and off, so you could specifically freeze just translate, rotate, or scale, and that's how that tool works for you there. So back to it. So I've got this. I'm checking the movement, and everything's working as expected for me there. Let me go ahead and I'll parent this to this shape here. So let's tap P for that. And then now if I rotate this, you can see the pivot point. I've moved the pivot point on this right in the center of this cylinder shape. So it has the appearance that maybe this would rotate like this. Obviously I can't rotate too far, otherwise I start to intersect my surfaces, but that's okay. We can deal with that when we start to try to animate. So my pivot point for this piece is back here. I thought that would be a good place for it. And that'll let this arm slide in and out of this one so it can shorten or lengthen. And so I'll just select that and I'll tap P for parent. And then I want these pieces to be parented to this. So I'll tap P for that, select this, and select this, tap P. And if I check this, I should be able to rotate these, and these follow. And I want both of these to be parented to this cylinder shape. So if I tap P for that, and you can see now I can rotate this and I can still open these, and then this is the parent of that one. So that's why these children are going to go along with this as the parent. And then I still, after even rotating these, I have the ability to open these up and do this with it and still rotate the parent. So I'm going to hit undo to get everything back. And whenever this arm moves in and out, I want this whole entire thing to follow along with the arm. So I'll select this and hold down Shift, and I'll select this, tap P, and then now if I've done that correctly, we should be able to move this entire structure together as if it's one mechanical arm like this. So just want to test again and make sure everything's working the way I expect. So I want this to move up and down. This is going to be able to rotate. So that's working. I want this to rotate up and down, and that's working. I want this to move in and out like this. And I want this to rotate. We've taken a look at that. And I want these to be able to rotate independently of that. And as far as a structure for everything, I don't have this set up yet. So this will move. This will move this part. But then I need the head. That structure that I said needs to be parented to this base. So I'll select this last, holding down Shift, selecting that, and tap P. And then now, whenever I move this around, it moves everything. And because it's in this empty group, we can move the empty group, and then that will move everything. Now this part can have a different transform than the empty group. So that might come in handy, and I can show you why. Just 1 second here. So let's set this to 0, and I'll take this and I'll set this to 0 as well. What I'm going to do is, because I've checked all my surfaces, and if we check them all, everything should be frozen for the transforms for this. And this is something you'll definitely want to check before you start animating. I did have problems where I didn't have some of the pieces and their transforms were not completely frozen before I started animating, and then you had to go and break connections, and it was just pretty messy for everything that needed to be done for that. So what I was going to show you about this, having these different transforms, and why that could be a nice thing for you. If I move this off to the side, and if I hold down X, I could snap to the grid. So let's just say we move it over 300 units. If I select this entire group, I can go to Edit, and I can go Duplicate Special and do the option box. And then from here, I'm going to copy this as an instance and give it a negative scale on X. So it should scale it across the X axis and give me a mirrored copy. And because it's an instance, whatever I do with this copy, it'll do it with this one as well. So what was pretty cool about this is inside of Maya, this is all working, and seemed to be a pretty good workflow. Now the problem is, if I push this into UE4, it would push the geometry in, but the normals are going to be reversed on here because of this negative scale. And what I found is that if you do a negative instance on a group, it'll duplicate everything over all the different pieces. But if you go to do this, Maya has a special thing in here, and I'm going to select the mesh on this side. If I select this and I go to modify and I convert instance to object, it will convert this back into regular geometry. But you can see let's see what we got here. Let's just go ahead and select this, and we'll go modify, convert instance to object like that. And well, this problem seems to be new. Normally, whenever I was selecting one of these objects and going modify, convert instance to object, it would make this entire side disappear. So it doesn't like the fact that I'm trying to instance things this way. So what I found is that you're going to want to, after things are set up, you're going to want to go and say edit duplicate special, and you can do an option box, and you can do this instead of an instance. You want to give it a negative scale like this. So the functionality is still going to be there, and if you need to push it to some place like Unreal, if you needed to freeze the transformations on it, you can go modify freeze transformations, and then we could just freeze the scale on these things. And so if we check these, if we selected this top group here that we have, it should push through all the different objects. So I'm just checking the scale and making sure there's not a negative scale on anything. So it pushes through for everything. But that was a big problem that I was trying to solve, is why will this geometry not go into UE4 or UE5 correctly like this. If I select this and just delete it, I'm going to just take this and I'm going to take one individual piece, like, let's just do this. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate that, and I'll Shift P to unparent it, and I should be able to move this up. So let me just show you what the power of actually making an instance actually is. So if I do edit duplicate special, and I'll just reset the settings on this to get rid of this negative scale, and I'll do an instance. And so normally whenever you duplicate as an instance like this, and if I hit Shift D, I can make copies of it. The draw is that I could have this off in some other location. This could be up here, it could be rotated like this. And if I make changes to the base object here, and I'll just grab this, pull this up like this, you can see it should do a change to each one of these. I don't know, I tried to duplicate with transforms and it didn't seem to like that. So I guess that's duplicating as just a copy. So if I kept duplicating these and said edit duplicate special, and then we did this as an instance and made sure it was an instance, I thought we could hit Shift D and do the duplicate with transform, but we can't. So let's just keep moving this over just for this illustration. And yeah, this should show you what I'm talking about. So it is nice from a modeling standpoint to be able to do this. Now, if this does give you any trouble in the program or somewhere else, then maybe you need to do what I was talking about, where we can come in through here and we can say this. So if I wanted to turn this into a real object and it's not an instance anymore, we can say modify, convert, and then do instance to object. And so now let's take a look and see if I'm pushing and making changes to this. You can probably already see by the selection on this that that's no longer an instance, and it became its own object. And so again, that is a powerful feature to be able to model that way and then to check things out. You could select everything that's an instance and edit, modify, convert instance to object right there, and then now these are just regular objects at that point. But what I was telling you is, if you have an entire structure, this hierarchy that's set up and it's put into a group, and why I want it in a group is that empty group gives it the origin right here, and so I could mirror that across if I wanted for that. And again, I'm not really sure why I didn't like that. As far as it works, as far as working inside of the program, I did look this up, and it was a bug that was talked about. So if you went over here to this one and said modify, convert, and then instance to object, yeah, it's just having issues for there. So I'm not even going to mess around with it anymore. It just seemed to cause problems. So make sure that if you do some structure like this and you want to use this as a pivot point to mirror across, just go to edit, duplicate special option box, instead of an instance, do a copy, and you should be able to mirror that across. You should be able to have the same functionality that you're looking for, where you've got this part, and if you just grab these two, you can animate both of them at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to put this back over here to 0. And then let's take a look at setting up some keyframes right now. So if you don't see your time slider, you could go up here and go take a look at the my classic layout, and you should have the time slider within here. I put 1,200 frames on here for this. And what I'm going to do is immediately set a keyframe at we can push this to 0. You could have it on 1 if you want. But I'm going to push it all the way to 0 like this on the time slider. And if we go to select, we can select hierarchy. And if we select hierarchy, it's basically like going through and selecting everything that is in this hierarchy that's here. So it's a nice feature for being able to select everything pretty quickly. Now if we hold, just click on the translate X, hold down shift, and then select this rotate Z, we can select everything in the channel box here, and then we can right click and say key selected. And then that's going to give us a keyframe here. I'm going to want to make a looping animation, so I just drag my time slider. There's no other keys, so I don't have anything to worry about. I can right click and say key selected. Now what's kind of interesting and fun about this is we could go to any time here on the time slider, and sometimes this messes me up when I'm trying to animate things. Let's say we rotate this up and we do a change like this and we want to check it out. We could explore, and if we just drag the time slider back, it snaps right back to that key, because we've got a keyframe here, we got a keyframe here, and it's everything's zeroed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go to frame 300 right there, and if we can't get it exact, then I can push over one more frame like that and go to 300. And let's rotate this 90 degrees like this. Okay, so I could key everything like that, but if I'm only rotating, I could also just select that one channel there and say key selected. And then now it's going to rotate, and I could hit the play button and see the rotation speed on that. Now it's going to go back to 0 because I've got a keyframe here that we set. And then remember we zeroed everything out, set a key here and here. So it's just animating back and forth between those two things. So I can go to 300 here. I didn't do anything with translation. So if I wanted to go back over that key, let's go back to 300. And if I set a key on translate Y, and then on here, let's say I wanted to go to frame 600. And then I want to push this down to look like it's animated to where it sits right in through here. Let's just get in there and take a look. -70. I'll do that, and then I'll key that. And then now I should have a key that rotates, and then after it rotates, we set the key to 0 here, and then we put this -70, so it's going to push it down. And then remember, it's going to always go back to that last key that we set at the very beginning. So it's starting to loop for us like that. Now if this base had some wheels on it and you wanted it to look like it was moving back and forth, we could do that, but I'm just going to keep it as if this is a solid base and this is moving up and down in this way here. So the other thing is, if we go here, we can go to this will pick whatever the keyframe going back or the next keyframe going up, so it could be an easy way to start changing some values. So if I want, I can put a key on this. This should be translate Z. And if you take a look at the movement options that I've got here, I'm moving this into object space. If it's in world, it's going to have the manipulator aligned to the world. This is pretty handy for when we set up our pivots and we're animating and we've got this hierarchy. You can just move this in object space. So I could just push this back. But right now, let's see, we were at 600, and what I want to do, I'm going to set a key where it's zeroed out, just to make sure I have it right there at that point. And then as it swings back around, let's go to frame 900. And I'm going to go push this back. Let's see how far we can push this back. Right about there, negative 175, and then I'll key that. And so now we're starting to rotate, move down like this. This is going to pull in. And I could also do this as well as we start to animate in here. Maybe I go to about 300 again. And then for this, I'm just going to set a key on everything. And then we'll go to 600. And I'm going to rotate this down like this. And let's just do 20. I'll do 25. And so this is push this down. It's going to pull this up. So maybe I could, animation-wise, go to 300 again. And then I'll just select these 3 pieces like this. So I've got three pieces selected. This is already selected in the channel box, so that's pretty nice. And I can just right-click and say key selected. And then what I'll do is rotate down. I'm going to rotate this up like this. Actually, let's just go down like this here. So select this, this, and this, and it's already, no, I deselected it. So let's right click in here and say key selected. And now it should look like it's coming down here. Then maybe pulling this up. So I'm going to go to 800 right here. And then rotate this up. And rotate these in. And if the manipulator gets in the way, I can tap Q, and I can hold down Shift, and I can select multiple things. So I'll key this. So I'm taking a look here, moves down, jumps up, and then moves out. And I'm glad I'm animating a mechanical thing because my animation skills are not the best. So we're at least starting to get some movement on here. And it rotates and moves around. The other thing I might do on this is just at the beginning of this, maybe rotate this up like this. And I think I should have not done that. I wasn't on a whole frame. So you can do this. You can select here, hold down Shift, and then drag, and you can move keys around. But I'm just going to go ahead and right click and say delete, and I can delete the key. And then that way I can make sure I'm on an exact number for this, which is not super important, but -12. I'll key selected for that. Then now I can just check out this animation and see what we've got. So I at least know that all the pieces are actually working now. And I think this is a pretty good demonstration of how hierarchies can work inside of Maya. Now this is just object-based hierarchies. If we got into game animation, we would be building a bone structure, and the bone structure would emulate basically what we see for this setup that you see here. So it would have the same exact hierarchy. It would be, we would just be taking these pieces and you would be skinning them to the joints, and that's how the game engine recognizes the motion on there. But as far as just working inside of Maya, this is a pretty good way of testing everything out, making sure your pivot points are set up correctly, and you're able to move predictably in here and have a good hierarchical setup. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show you is how we can set up a nice little light rig inside of Maya, and then after we've animated this, how we can do a playblast so we can get an idea of what's going on with the animation part of this. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this real quick here. And what I did was I took my perspective camera. You can always go through the different cameras that you've got and go perspective. This is the default perspective camera view. If you want to make a new one, you can go perspective. You can go new here. That's how you can create a camera. You can also take your perspective camera and just hit Control D and duplicate it. But if you middle mouse drag it into the world, you can see that I've got on here, I've got under my camera settings, I can see my gate mask and that resolution gate, and that's going to show me what I'm actually going to be rendering out and what the aspect ratio is. So I went in through here and just set up under the rendering settings, just 1920 by 1080. And that will give you everything you need to frame everything up. I did have to check the animation quite a few times to make sure everything was still within frame as it would swing from left to right, and then if it came across the bottom. So I had to just do a little bit of work to get that within frame. If you want to keep your render camera, if you don't have any animation on it, you want to make sure that that sticks, just like we did with the other hierarchy parts. If you go back to the first frame here, you select your render camera, and we can grab the translate X, hold down shift, go all the way to rotate Z, and then key selected. Now if I go and do anything accidentally with this camera, I can just go back to the beginning frame of the animation, and it will just snap that camera right back to where it was at before. So knowing that, I can move around a little bit. We have talked about infinity walls and how to build an infinity wall. So I just placed the infinity wall from a previous project into here, and then these are just a bunch of point lights. If I go up to show lights, this is a way that you can just turn off the display of these things and still have them in the world. You can go to show, and you can hide a bunch of different things. So I just had lights hidden for that. And I have a bunch of point lights all around the object to give it light, even in some of the darkest areas that it has. I could actually maybe tweak this stuff out a little bit better and maybe get a little bit more light in the front of this thing. But if I hit Control A, you can see I've used warms and cool colors for these. And so what I usually like to do, I don't know if I did the best job on this, but usually have a little bit of warmth on one side and cool colors on the other side, and then have a spotlight that we see within here. So if we go to create and we go to lights, this is where you can create the different point lights. And what I did on the point lights was I actually told it to have a decay rate of quadratic, and that's supposed to be something that's a little bit more physically accurate as far as fall off of light. So it falls off pretty quickly, so you have to have really, really high numbers with this. If you get close to the object, it can get a bit brighter and a bit hotter. So just with a little bit of saturation, not tons of saturation, you can add a little bit of color. You can see there is a lot of saturation down here in the bottom, and there might be some lights, down below. So even though I don't have shadows turned on for these, you might have to do this. There was a bug with Maya that you had to go to shadows and then say use depth map shadows and then turn it off to get the shadows to go off, which is unfortunate, but it was there. So you can see with this quadratic fall off, if I get too close to the surface here, the reason I think I was pushing this down below, it would still interact with the object, but I don't want it to mess with the floor like this. And so here's where we're at value wise. Like I said, wouldn't want too much saturation on here, so if I can lighten this up just a little bit and through here, and you could select multiple lights and maybe change their values. Usually over here in the channel box is where you're gonna have to do that. So if I wanted to make these twice as bright as what they are right now, I could do that and through there. So just a bunch of point lights. Something different about the spotlight. If you go and create lights and you do a spotlight, you can see that here's the option box for this. I like to have a penumbra angle of 20 and a cone angle. So this penumbra angle gives you a nice soft fall off on things. Let's see if I can see this here. So if I do a penumbra angle of 0, you can see it's going to be super, super tight. It's just going to give you that view of the cone. So if I select that middle mouse drag, you can see I can increase the size of that or decrease it like that. And with the penumbra angle, I can middle mouse and then I can make that a bit wider and I might go even higher than that. 20. You can go higher with that too. It's just this nice soft fall off for the gradient within there. The other thing is on this one I do want shadows casting from this, so I'll say use depth map shadow. I give it a resolution of 1024, and then this filter size looks pretty nice. This is probably what it's going to look like whenever you first load up the light, which is horrible. So we just take this filter size, drag it over to the right, and it softens it up quite a bit. Now, I wish Maya had this thing where you could keep increasing the filter size and overdrive it. It doesn't really seem to do anything. But if we put it on 512 like this, and then we did a filter size of, I think the highest it would go before is like 5. So it's nice and soft, but it's still pretty jaggedy. So we can go up to 1024 and bump that up, and then 2048, keep jumping like that. Again, I wish I could overdrive that and make it nice and soft, but 5 is as high as that's going to go. So that'll give us some soft shadows, and then I've turned on screen space ambient occlusion, and I think that's a pretty nice option as well. For the lighting to show up with the shadows, you're going to have to go to lighting and then turn on shadows here, and then that should give you everything you need. Now if you're in 5, if you tap 5, this is going to be just regular lit, and if you do 7, that's going to be you know, shadows. So if we go here, you can see what we've got. This is just 5, and then if we do 7, it's going to turn this on for use all lights like this. So if I go right here, you can see where we're at with that. I had a little bit more dramatic with that. Prenumbal angle was maybe 10, 20, something like that. So I could even do this, the cone angle, if I made this smaller like that and did the prenumbal angle wider, I could get more of a gradient. So I could even do that, and it almost looks like a vignette at that point. Now I don't really want these icons on, so I'll just go to show and I'll turn off lights for the display for that. I'm just going to save that. And then to do the play blast, I already had an animation that was 1200 frames long. So what I can do is right click here in the timeline and then go to play blast, do the option box, and then come here. And I was just saving it out as an AVI format. I did have problems with the VCL, I think is the name of that program that plays AVIs for me. This was set to none and it didn't like that. I just put it on this encoding TSCC, and then you can see here, put the quality to 90, display size from window, and that's going to be right here with here. If you want to do a smaller thing, like if I do 1, it's going to do 1920 by 1080, but if we do 0.5, it'll do half the size of that. And then this is, you can tell it to save file, and then this is where you can give it a path where you want to save, and then just hit apply. And I've already got a file, so it's going to overwrite that file. So I'm just going to go ahead and let that run through, and it goes pretty quickly, capturing the frames. So right now it's set to 24 frames a second, so it might be running faster as it captures, but when we play the play blast, we'll get an idea of exactly what the true animation speed of everything is. And I believe when it's done, should pop this up for us, and you can see now it feels a lot slower. That's because we're running again at 24 frames a second. So if you wanted to do 30 frames a second, you could do that, or if you're doing something for games, maybe it's going to be 60 frames a second. But that should give you a nice little setup to render out your models. Make sure that you're checking everything. You got a pretty decent look for everything, and it's all running pretty fast too. So this could help out with the display of your animations. It could help out with just how you show off presentation. You know, if you're going to do a presentation and, you know, show this to a client or something like that, this is a more professional way of showing things off. Now I did forget to turn off my heads up display, so if we want to display, heads up display, and then turn off my poly counts and that, then I could hide some of that stuff within there. Okay, there's one last little nugget that I found here that didn't really know till I had to look this thing up, but I couldn't get the resolution gate to go away, and I just wanted to render out just the frame for the animation like you see here. And in order to do that, we have to go to view, and I was telling you about going to view, camera settings, and then turn on the resolution gate. This is going to help you get everything lined up and know exactly what you're building for the animation. But whenever you're done with that, If you don't want to see that, we're going to go display, heads up display, turn off the poly count information. That'll turn that off, and then we'd have to go to view camera settings and then just say no gate like that. And then now whenever you do the play blast, if you do the option box, you could make sure you turn off the show ornaments too. But then this display size should work from this render settings. You could do from window, but it's going to be from the actual size from the window, I believe. Or you could do custom, and you could put a custom value within there. But I'm just going to stick to what it says from the render settings and go ahead and hit apply for that. And you can see it's going to throw it down here in the corner. It's going to go through, and then it's going to animate. And then you should have a nice video. Looks pretty decent with the quality, and everything is the right size for you, and you don't have any the extra stuff on the screen as well. Okay, so that's going to conclude this for this section for hierarchies inside of Maya, and then how we can set up a nice little light rig inside of Maya, get some animation playing, and then do a play blast so we can share that in other different formats.